the only other item is item number 16, Central City Regeneration Tackling Barrier Sites, and I'm going to vacate the chair and leave. I'm going on a road trip to Timaru. Yay!
Water management chair.
Eh? That's why I left it till last.
Your fault.
Your latest junk.
I
wouldn't say Timaru.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, it's all changed, isn't it? Ah, right, okay. Okay, so now that we've had the change of shift at this table, we will kick on. So, staff, welcome to the table. Was there any commentary that you wanted to make on this report before we move into questions?
Relate to the... Can you hear me?
Yep.
Sorry, maybe I was covering that up. Is that the report identifies a framework and a pathway for resolution that staff have pulled together, staff from across the organisation have pulled together, and that the report identifies that we will work on a case-by-case basis with landowners, building owners, focusing initially on the central city, but noting in the report that over time we may look at other parts of the city, but that framework, that resolution pathway and the case-by-case approach is how staff intend to work. So that probably for me is the kind of key summary of the points in the report.
Great, thank you very much. So we'll now move into questions. Dion?
From the deputation this morning and a couple of conversations that I've had with some of the people that are on and I don't want to focus on the list, which is why I want to talk about it to start with, because it shouldn't be about that list, it should be about the process. But is it possible, because obviously we have to have a list so we can understand, is it possible to have potentially two separate lists of some sort? So one is about those owners and those buildings, people, whatever, that we know of that are probably local, that we're working with closely, they have a resolution in mind, they're actually getting on and doing the work. And then the other one, which is around the more harder ones that we actually can't work with or haven't actually got an understanding of where they're going next.
So perhaps if I could answer through the chair, the matters being for consideration today are up on the screen there. So I just draw your attention to the list that you didn't want to mention, Councillor, isn't part of the resolution that we're seeking today. So as Caroline said, what we're proposing to you and for your decision is a framework for how the council organisation can approach the revitalisation of the central city. So the central city has a number of buildings within it that we all know are being seen as barrier sites, but out of the context of many thousands of buildings. So staff need some guidance on how to prioritise and manage within our workload where we're going to focus the initial attention. So we intentionally haven't provided the list as part of the paper, and the reasons why are articulated in the paper. A city like this list will be a living document, so it's different to how it was today than how it was yesterday, and it will be different today. So if you'd like to talk about specifics, we can go through some of those specifics, but the decisions being sought from council are about the framework, not about the list per se.
And I think that's good advice and timely advice at this stage as we get into this item. The decision this afternoon, as Brendan has said, is about the framework and not about the content of any list of buildings.
Yes, I know.
So the framework is the decision that we're making this afternoon. Glenn.
Thank you. Have you, just under 5.5, page 185, and I've never seen a report with the word tackling in it, so it's quite fascinating. But 5.5, it talks about insurance. Do you know approximately what percentage are unresolved insurance claims? Approximately, just a rough round figure.
Around a quarter of the sites.
A quarter?
Yeah.
Yanni.
Thank you. I guess wanted to get a bit more context. There's been comments that we're declaring war, and I just wanted to get a bit more context from you in terms of how you saw this approach, if you see it as being that intimidating, that sort of hostile, or whether you see this as in terms of the approach will be more collaborative and engaged.
But point of order, Mr. Chair, I don't think it's appropriate for a councillor to question a comment that a councillor made and ask staff to justify that.
I was asking about the approach.
You're asking them of comments that I made.
Yep, Brendan's happy to answer the question, but Brendan, in doing so, obviously answer those parts of the question that you feel are relevant. If there's anything that you feel isn't appropriate, then feel free not to answer that part of the question.
Sure. So we've been guided by the Development Forum and the Strategic Capability Committee, who we've both briefed as we develop this approach. And both of those two council subcommittees have been very clear that what they wanted to see was an approach that both supported and incentivised those developers, but also sought to fairly apply the existing regulatory framework, and then thirdly sought to make sure that council had the full range of existing tools available, and for those in transient situations where no progress was being made, that we would step through that three-step approach. So as the diagram on page 186 illustrates, the staff recommendation is a three-step approach: dialogue, support, incentivise is the first. Secondly, add pressure. Third, enforcement and regulation. So I think it would be suffice to say that the staff recommendation is that we use that framework. I'm aware that people have commented on it, but those kind of types of comments aren't part of the staff advice. And we've played a pretty straight bet about what the framework is.
Right. Yep. And just a second question, in terms of my reading of the report, is that we've actually got the existing tools. So I was just wondering why we haven't used those tools up until now, or what the difference will be in terms of applying those tools in this framework.
So I think that up until the changes in the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Act and I guess the kind of view of the city moving from recovery to regeneration, many of these sites were under the management of Sarah, and so it's taken us time to work through the information to kind of develop the framework and toolbox and understand the situation and bring this to you now, and to some degree prompted by the calls from the Development Forum to perhaps give this a little bit more of a focus as the city moves more positively into that regeneration phase.
Right. So, and just a final question from me was, there has also been requests previously around dealing with vacant derelict sections in the suburbs, and also I guess possibly some as-is whereas properties that have been subject to quite severe vandalism. What process do you see that the community would have in terms of raising those sorts of concerns around how to get action on those buildings that have sat, or those sections that have sat in quite a, what may be considered quite a dangerous state?
Well, we don't have colleagues from the building control part of the organisation here with us today, but they have particular toolboxes and processes that they would go through. So they have quite a lot of public information processes, so people could use those that already exist to make those sites known to the organisation, and then they can be triaged through those processes to understand those situations.
Sorry, just so I'm clear. So the process is we raise it through community board and through staff, and then you put it into this framework.
I'd just caution that your example of gravel car parks is of course permitted activity under a temporary accommodation order in council that exists currently through till 2021. So our ability to take regulatory action is within the legal framework. So we're not seeking and have not up to now sought changes to prevent things that are currently legally able to do, even though people might view a gravel car park as offensive or poor use of land. It's not, not permitted.
That. But where you've got a vacant house that's been vandalised for 5 years, got all the windows smashed, is boarded up, but full of graffiti, houses are being burnt, in some suburbs. People are really concerned. Is there any way in which those issues will be addressed?
So I think those are excellent examples, and there are a variety of existing legislative approaches that we can take for insanitary type homes or buildings, and from your description, that would probably best fit under insanitary buildings.
Right. Okay.
Thank you. Phil.
Thank you. Clearly this is around the framework which we've got, and it's clear in attachment 1 for us. But this morning, you might recall, we had a deputation in effect which said, look, the people felt, or the owners felt, they were doing their best by the city, and that they would have liked that kind of acknowledged. But also, I guess, the letter they received they weren't happy with. So clearly in the framework there's a case management approach. Can we have assurance that in fact that's what's going to be followed from now on?
Absolutely, that's...
150 million to New York.
Ignore that.
Absolutely, that's what will be followed, and in fact has been applied to sites up till now. And I'd also note that that there are several buildings that staff have identified for the framework and the case management approach, where in the past council's already provided support through heritage incentive grants. And I'd note too that the hoardings rebate and the rates rebate for temporary activation is also available for landowners to take advantage of in this process.
Mike.
Thank you. So I guess with all these buildings, there's quite a wide range of buildings, and potentially local owners and overseas owners that are actually trying to get stuff done, and some that aren't. Are there any owners that we can't contact that we're aware of?
I'll let those who are doing the contact answer.
Yeah. There are one or two which we've been trying to get hold of, but in terms of overseas owners, there's actually one on the list. So they are largely all locally owned, or certainly New Zealand owned.
So when we look at this framework with the approach of going carrot to the stick, obviously if we can't get hold of some of these owners, we've got the tools in here to go straight to the stick, and the stick will be effective when we can't actually contact people.
So, as noted in the resolutions, we would report, but because they're clearly using a stick it's the last step in the process. So we're noting there that we would bring a report back to council where that was proposed, because there could be financial and other implications for council, and clearly you would want to know that before staff and approve or agree to that before staff took that action.
Anne.
I very much endorse this action, because I think we are often negatively impacted by what we see in the central city, and I think a lot of the community have been feeling really disempowered by the state of things, and I think action like this is very positive, and I think it really would build a sense of hope in many cases. So I'm very much in favour of your work with this.
Okay, noting that we're still in questions, are there any further questions for staff on this matter?
I was just going to ask Anne if that was a question.
The question is, how do you think the state of the central city can affect mental health? There you go.
Good save, well done.
I hadn't quite finished.
Actually, interesting that you asked that question. I've just seen a report from the United Kingdom that it actually is indicating that the city has a big impact on people's mental health. I suspect this is a new area in that line of study. So I'm watching with interest what research is coming out from other cities.
Great, thank you very much. Now, Jamie, you're happy to move this? Do we have a seconder? Dion? Great, so now moving into debate. Pauline?
I'll be really quick, but look, I support this entirely because I know that it's full of carrots. I know that it's really council's trying to really be front-footing this, and I agree with Anne. I think that has a huge impact on our mental health and our daily emotion, but also I think it's a way of actually honouring and respecting what is being done in the central city and the challenges that the developers who are building and going ahead and getting these things open have faced and overcome, and that's being brought down by what's surrounding them. So we just want to lift the whole thing. That's the idea. And to go into the city is just incredible. It's getting better every day. So this will actually add heaps to that. So thank you for getting this together. It's wonderful.
Great, thank you. Glenn?
Thank you. Having been on the Regulatory Performance Committee since the beginning, I fully support the VADE approach. So that's that kind of spectrum moving from carrot to stick. I think it actually gives some owners the chance to save face and say hypothetically the cathedral's on the list, then that gives them a chance to find a way out before they really have to face up to their pastoral responsibility and show some leadership. Another thing that I note is that if insurance, of which comprises 25% of these buildings, if what we've done as a council in terms of promoting an insurance tribunal concept had been applied to commercial insurance, that could have helped resolution way back then, and we wouldn't be in this place. So that's a pity. Anyway, I support this. I think it's good. The kind of agenda's out there now. It's declared. So we'll start off softly, but if you don't start fronting up, the vice is going to be wound up, and yeah, I support that.
Yanni?
Thank you. I just wanted to move an amendment based on the deputation that we had, which requested that we remove 25 Peterborough and 91 Victoria Street off the list. And we've also had an email around
It's not about the list.
another one on
Yanni, it's not about the list, it's about the framework.
We've had
Disregard the
we've
list.
had a deputation from people. So do we just not respond? Like, what's the process?
The list is a living list. The list
Well,
has changed.
how do you want me to respond to the deputation? Because I'm really keen to listen and respond to the concerns that were raised.
Yeah, and my response to that would be that the new additional recommendations, Recommendation 4 and Recommendation 5, actually address a number of the issues that we heard in the deputation this morning, and also some of the commentary that we're aware that's taken place on the letters since they were sent out. We are very aware that there are building owners who received those letters who are taking every best endeavour to repair their buildings. Some of those buildings are actively under repair and they've got finish dates which are later in the year this year. There are other buildings where the building owners are actively working with their insurers, and there are all sorts of frustrating situations around insurance, heritage, finances, all sorts of intractable issues that building owners are working on to get to a point where there's a final outcome for that building, whether it's repair or whether it's otherwise. We need to do everything we possibly can to support those building owners, and the acknowledgements in paragraphs 4 and 5, I think, do that, along with acknowledging a number of the issues that were raised in the deputation that we heard this morning and have been raised informally by other building owners since the letters were sent out. So my own belief is that paragraphs 4 and 5, resolutions 4 and 5, actually address quite possibly the issues that you're seeking to raise without the need to move into a discussion about the list, because actually that's not what this afternoon's decision-making and discussion's about.
Right, okay. So in terms of the direction from this report, in terms of the 30, we're still saying to staff, get on and address those 30. So, I mean, we're not reducing that to 26 or 27 and saying actually the ones we know people are doing work on are okay, but actually the 27 that no one's doing work on, they're the ones that we're going to focus on.
So what we're saying, as I understand it, is that there are 30 buildings on this list. This is a living list and it's subject to change. The list may well be different tomorrow than it is today. Okay. And we're acknowledging that there are some buildings where there are issues that could have been resolved and haven't been resolved, and there are other buildings where there are issues like, for example, encroachment of barriers onto pavements, where those barriers are there for a very good and necessary reason and need to be there to assist the building owner in completing the works on their building. I'd like to think paragraphs 4 and 5 give us a strong steer to staff that any conversation working with building owners or subsequent action will be appropriate to the building concerned and the situation that the building owner's in. And I think the discussion that we've just had now makes that clear, but I think the resolutions 4 and 5 also make that very clear as well.
Okay, so I'll speak in support. I think it's really positive that we're getting a framework. I think, you know, it certainly has not just been requested around the central city, and I just want to stress that, you know, even last term, Councillor Paul Lonsdale and myself were very assertive over the need to try and do something with some of the suburban sites as well. There are some, you know, either as-is, whereas buildings or places that are quite vandalised and derelict that do need attention. We have existing powers, so I think it's a case of using those powers wisely, but also understanding what people are going through. I know in the past when I've followed up with staff on specific buildings that the community have raised concern about, one of the responses has been that these people are stuck with dealing with insurance matters, and I in no way want to add further stress on people that are dealing with the very stressful situation of dealing with the insurance companies and the way in which people have been treated in our city. And I think my colleague made reference to that earlier, that, you know, I do think issues around insurance advocacy are one of the biggest gaps and possibly one of the best solutions. So I hope as we move through this framework, we can be mindful of if we do need additional resources and support going in there, then we should be looking at that, or maybe advocating to central government to do more. So I think it's really important that this is seen as a cooperative approach with the building owners, not a punitive one, unless all else has failed. So, you know, I am concerned about some of the perception of what this will do, and I just think we should be incredibly grateful to those who are trying to restore their buildings, particularly the heritage buildings. I think that's really positive, and we should be working constructively with them. I also think that this sends a letter to ourselves. I think council received letters, and we also need to look and reflect on our own buildings that are still sitting there damaged, cordoned off, fenced off in the central city, and let's get on and start fixing those buildings, because I think it's pretty ironic that we'd be asking others to do the same, but we wouldn't be doing that ourselves. And the final point I'll make is that I understand that this won't be able to be part of this framework, but I do think we should think about a framework for construction companies, particularly ones that are doing roading contracts in the central city or in the suburbs, because one of the other issues I think has been that huge delays in some of the roading infrastructure repairs that has created all sorts of problems and issues, and it would be really good at some stage to think about a framework for people that are doing public works around reasonableness of timeframes and expectations of how long or short some of those projects should be taking compared to what they are, because those projects also have had a huge disruption on people, and it has, you know, been very stressful for people in the community to deal with the consequence of those. But I appreciate that now is not the time to do that.
Thank you. Phil?
Thank you. Look, I think it's understandable that some people who got the letters were upset. And basically, though, there was no favouritism. We as council are responsible for fixing our buildings too. And I think it's absolutely clear that in terms of the framework, we're starting with the support and incentives. And that needs to be understood. Anne Galloway before referred to a lot of public concern really, and why people don't come to the city because of often the unkempt state of these derelict sites. And that's precisely what we asked the staff to do in terms of establishing this framework. And today's staff have reminded us that in fact there have been a lot of incentives for people in the central city already, and the rebates on the cost of the hoardings and rates rebates, they're very clear. We often don't hear back about that, but they are incentives which in fact this council have put into place. So it's important that we are very clear, and I think we are, that phase one is all really around support and incentives so that these changes are made, which the public have asked us to make sure we put into effect.
Dion?
I just want to speak in support of this, especially from my perspective, this is another piece to the puzzle. Actually, firstly, I'd just like to thank Carolyn for the work that you have done and your team. It's not been easy, I can appreciate that. There's been a lot of discussion. I do want to say thank you publicly to that. But the big picture here is actually about the city as a whole recovering from the earthquake, and then moving forward in a way that respects the investment that we as a city are putting in, the private developers are putting in, and the Crown that are putting in, and actually getting back a sense of actually having a city that we do want to attend and do want to be part of. This is another part of the link to having the city back that you can come and visit and enjoy, without the barriers or the emotional dragging down of what we've seen in the past. And we're putting transport infrastructure, we're putting parking buildings, and getting the roads sort of a little bit faster. We've sped up some of the work that Otakara are doing and all things like that. This is all coming together to get the city back and running, and I'm really looking forward to, at the end of this year, the summer coming up, to actually being back in the central city. I actually think it's going to be quite a nice place to be. We'll address a lot of the issues around the public realm, which is why I like the way that this framework has been pointed, because it talks about the public realm, the derelict buildings, partial uncompleted building sites, unkept vacant sites, and temporary gravel car parks, all differently and separately, so we can address those, and each one's different. Everybody has a different situation in this recovery, and everybody's situation needs to be identified and worked together. And I do want to make sure that the people that are working hard, who are investing a lot of money into this, aren't going to be lumped into being seen as holding down the recovery, because some of them do have those problems, and we need to look at that when we do sort of release these what buildings are, which is going to happen eventually. We need to make sure that we don't stigmatise some of those people that are putting a lot into the city. So I want to make sure that that doesn't happen, and I'm sure that we'll work together to make that happen. But again, I really am looking at the bigger picture here for the central city. It's a place where we want to work, we want to invest, and we want people to come and live back, and I think it's going to be a fantastic place.
And finally, Mike. Oh, and Jamie, you're the mover, so that's all right. So Mike and then Jamie.
Yep. I'm in support of this. I was going to talk, but there's actually been enough councillors talking in support of it, and for quite a long time, so I won't speak.
How do you follow that one? Yeah, thanks, Mike. All right, a lot of it has been said, but I would like to just touch on what Phil said about the combination of the sticks and the carrots, and it's true, we have got incentives there, and we've actually got quite a lot of incentives, but there's a time and a place to bring out the disincentives too, and 6 years on, I don't think anyone would disagree that we're probably at that point, and some would argue that we possibly should have brought out those sticks a little bit earlier. This is about a framework. It's not about the list. The list has been widely publicised, but it's most certainly a living list, and I think that that's a really key point that we need to stress, that it's evolving. There are a handful of property owners on that list that aren't going to be pursued. and I think we just need to be really clear that common sense will be applied. There are genuine cases of people going through some pretty traumatic insurance wrangles. There are people there that are doing their absolute best to do everything they can to make Christchurch a better place, and there's plenty of hurdles there, and they are not the people that are the target of this framework. So common sense will most certainly be applied, and I really do want to stress that. But we've got a city to rebuild, and to be really frank with you, I wouldn't care if some of these absentee landowners were just sitting there and it was costing them a bit of money and it was only affecting them, but it's not. It's wider than that. It has a detrimental effect to everyone else that's actually trying their utmost to make a go of this. It's really hard to try and sell a beautiful new inner city apartment to a family when you've got squatters living next door, or you're looking next door wondering if that derelict site's going to burn down. Really hard to lease a property as well inside the central city when you've got a building that's falling down around it. So I think everything that needs to be said has been said, and I won't continue to go on about it other than just finally wrap up and say that I support this new framework. I genuinely really commend the staff for being so proactive in this space. A couple of letters have gone out to people that they might not have that they shouldn't have perhaps gone out to, and you know what, that's fine, because it means we're trying stuff, we're actually putting ourselves out there, and if you're not getting something wrong every now and again, you're probably not putting yourself out there or trying. So it's I would far prefer to issue an apology and retract one or two than actually not cast that net as wide and miss a whole host of people that are really taking the mickey out of the city. And some of those people are sitting on their hands that have been paid out a sizable insurance payout, and I'm over it. They've been holding the city to ransom, so let's be quite open about that. And if there's a bit of stigma associated with that, great. So go for it, staff. Thank you very much.
So I think, just to sum up, we need to be aware that there are different buildings out there with different issues. There are different building owners out there with different issues. And there are a number of buildings that are currently under repair or that are planned to be repaired where there are justifiable delays and there have been some difficulties. There are other buildings out there where there are building owners that haven't been so proactive, and that's certainly where there is some frustration with the slowness of progress. And here we've got a framework that allows us to support those building owners that are doing what exactly we and the people of the city would want them to do, and it's also a framework that allows us to do what we need to do to get some movement on those other sites that have been causing frustration. So I welcome this, and I'm now happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Against? As carried. Thank you. So we'll note that was unanimous. Thank you. Okay.